I've been asked frequently to explain how to spot controlled opposition and containment traps. So I thought it was time to expand on that in some detail, in actual fact, if you'll bear with me, and I hope you will, because this is very interesting. It is for those who want to avoid the containment trap and the controlled opposition. So there's a very obvious clue. If a political figure leading a safety valve operation is pumped and promoted around the clock by the mainstream media whilst claiming to be anti-establishment, you can be absolutely certain that said person is a containment trap and is in actual fact a safety valve operator. Of course, there's no better example than one Nigel Farage and his deepfake Reform UK. They are, quite simply, like UKIP, pumped and promoted around the clock. It's called talking up. So when you want to generate interest in someone who's actually running your safety valve operation, you keep talking about them, you talk them up. Even if you claim not to favour them, not to support them, the fact that you keep talking them up keeps them in the public eye, keeps them a household name. So just imagine for 1 minute, if you will, Farage without the mainstream media talking him up. Let's go back to 2011, before he struck that really shady deal with News International, where they talked him up into the figure that he became during the EU ref. Imagine that did not happen. And at the same time, equally, imagine that he wasn't pumped and promoted to an international audience by RT News. For those who don't know what that is, Russia Today News, using their YouTube algorithm, their hugely successful YouTube algorithm, that is, before they were banned. So imagine those two things did not happen. You know, where would Nigel Farage be today? Well, he wouldn't be a household name, would he? At all, you know? And he certainly wouldn't be leading Reform UK, and it wouldn't be in the position that it's in right now. And as for Reform UK, the reason why it's in this position, apparently topping the polls, if the polls can be believed, is entirely because of the talking up operation by the mainstream media. They're always in the news. Now, the people who claim to be anti-establishment themselves, well, we're voting for these people because we're anti-establishment. Well, that, of course, is absolute nonsense, isn't it? Surely. If your chosen choice of anti-establishment activists is constantly in the mainstream media through talking up, through being pumped and promoted, you are voting for an establishment safety valve operation. It really is quite clear, isn't it? Apart from to the people who are victims. And I think that's the right word to use in actual fact. Victims of the pumping up and safety valve operation. And of course, we've covered this many times in the past. You know, Farage is a past master at flat packing organisations at the height of their success. Just when they're about to make a truly historic breakthrough, they disappear, they fall to pieces, and he always comes out a bit richer than he was before. And then when they need him again, they bring him back with yet another fake or deep fake outfit like Reform. This is his third such outfit in actual fact. And no doubt if Reform does collapse by one means or another, that's exactly what they'll try to do. You know, the whole objective behind it is to keep everything under control, to maintain the status quo, and to feed them with this delusion that things are going to change. And then at the very last moment, it all falls apart and everything goes into completely orchestrated disarray and chaos, leaving everyone to pick up the tatters. In other words, setting back the cause many years. And then once they've regrouped and got themselves together again, along comes Farage with yet another fake safety valve operation. But of course, it has limited shelf life. You know, he's not getting any younger, is he? And none of us are, in actual fact. Might come as a great surprise to some people. But no, he's not getting any younger. And so they'll always have to find someone else. And at this moment in time, they just don't have anyone else like Nigel Farage. And of course, they have Tommy Robinson, but his electoral appeal is, well, it's about zilch, isn't it? I don't think he could poll any more than 5 to 6% at best in any election. So forget Tommy in the electoral context. He's never going to be a winner there. We know that for a certain. And plus, because of his extensive criminal record, he wouldn't be able to stand now anyway. You know, they'd find some grounds, basically, to strike that out. Even though Tommy is really yet another safe pair of hands. You know, he's almost indistinguishable from Farage on policy issues. There's not an awful lot of difference between them. Probably only a whisker, in truth, quite frankly. And of course, there is another easy way to spot containment traps, controlled opposition. So they all oppose remigration, every single one of them. And the best way, in actual fact, to ascertain if someone is a containment trap, controlled opposition, is ask them if they support remigration. If they say yes, then obviously the mainstream media are going to be against them straight away, vehemently opposed to them. So, you know, that's a very obvious clue that someone is not containment. Someone told me today that Rupert Lowe supports remigration. Well, I've seen no public evidence of that whatsoever. But if he does come out and support remigration, then you can be absolutely certain the mainstream media will gang up against him very quickly to put him out of business and to depreciate his support. That's the way it works. Farage, of course, we know is vehemently opposed to remigration, always has been, hates nationalism with a passion, while spinning phony patriotism and an aura of quasi-nationalism. That's all about maintaining the safety valve operation and drawing people in and taking them down a blind alley in the distraction process to ensure they never actually do anything meaningful. So we can hear all the howls of derision in the background. Oh, this is terrible, shocking. How could anyone say this about the Messiah? Well, he's a Monty Python Messiah, if anything. He certainly suffers from messianic complex. We know that for certain. His ego is just inestimable. It truly is. But it has no place in reality. So getting back to the real world, you know, as I said, I reiterate, put someone on the spot, ask them if they support remigration. If they say they're opposed to it, I'm afraid to say they're part of the problem and will never be part of the solution. There's your containment trap. Classic example is all of the people who work at the Lotus Eaters. Connor Tomlinson, who's recently done a little walkie, and now Josh Firm's off as well. And but all of them, yeah, they all support, you know, I guess you could say deportation to a certain extent. Yeah, primarily of the boat invaders, as they're colloquially known. But none of them actually support remigration. They're all opposed to that. And another way to spot the safety valve operators is, you know, their use of the left-wing lexicon, such as describing Steve Laws as a notorious online racist, and describing parties like the Homeland Party and the British Democrats as the real far right, for example. You know, this is all leftist think tank, and it's generated by the left, and they've adopted it. And so, you know, we've now come up with this new terminology of right-wing lefties. Well, are any of them actually right-wing? I mean, if you look at Carl Benjamin, you know, who has to be one of the most irritating, smug, arrogant, and actually quite childish centre-right operators, well, the man frequently indulges in the leftist lexicon. You know, you can sit there, you know, on the Lotus Eaters, have a little rant about mass immigration, the failure of multiculturalism and the multiracial society, and say, you know, this has all failed. It's all been a disaster. It's not going to work. You know, we need to bring this to an end. But then, in the same breath, he opposes remigration, yeah. And in the next breath, he has a little rant about notorious online racists and the real far right. This is how you spot containment trap operators. Safety valve. That's what it's all about. These people are not genuine. They're a talking shop, a collective talking shop. I've come to the conclusion that absolutely every centre-right organisation is controlled opposition or a containment trap. And that includes the Heritage Party. And the reason why I say that, well, whilst David Curtin actually talks a great deal of sense, you know, ultimately he's not in favour of remigration, and he comes from a UKIP background. And this is another very important point. So now UKIP allowed its membership to be vetted by neo-communist hope not hate. I mean, my goodness, if that doesn't scream out one massive red flag, a huge alarm bell, quite frankly, that should burst your eardrums, in real terms, that is, you know, and nothing will ever bring you back to reality, quite frankly. Farage, I know for certain, was handing over the UKIP membership list to Hope Not 8 from 2010 onwards, and Alan Sked was doing it before him. So it's like this, when they say right-wing lefties, well, were they ever really right-wing? So in truth, you know, all of these centre-right groups, including like the New Culture Forum, you know, they're all the same. Lotus Eaters, they're all talking heads, quite frankly. And they're all involved in the containment trap, the safety valve operation. There's only so far they're prepared to go. And the reason why is because ultimately, trace them back to their root of origin. They all come from the Tory party originally. Yeah? I could put it, the most toxic cesspit of phony patriotism this country has ever seen, in actual fact, particularly under Margaret Thatcher. And so eventually, as the Tory party, the official Tory party that is, became more and more liberal left, more of them fell out of the ranks and joined UKIP. But UKIP, in essence, was always ever the Tories 2.0. The same as Reform UK today is the Tories 2.0. Absolutely no doubt about it. And so when UKIP was ordered to disband by the mainstream media after the EU ref, and Nigel, of course, duly obliged, ran away to the United States and flat-packed UKIP. And the rest is history, isn't it? Well, no, it's living history in actual fact, because the story is still unfolding. You know, the UKIP saga really is not over. It's still unfolding right now. And so they all splintered into factions and different groups, one of which was the Heritage Party. And so therefore, because David Curtin does not support remigration, and he still uses the phraseology of the left when talking about nationalists who do support remigration, then we have to conclude that the man is containment, quite frankly. Connor Tomlinson, as we know perfectly well, you know, containment Connor was the buzz phrase going around social media recently when he was ranting about the Homeland Party. And in fact, you know, that's a very noticeable thing, because all of these centre-right groups are now ranting about Kenny Smith and the Homeland Party. And that also includes the quasi-nationalists at Britain First, led by the, you know, sickening grifter, Paul Golding. You know, they're all having a meltdown, a rant, because nationalists are regrouping behind a credible political force led by Kenny Smith. And as such, you know, that really does scare them, or terrify them, as Kenny said to me. And I think it really does, in actual fact, because the one thing all of these containment traps are set up to do is to stop nationalism from succeeding, to ensure remigration can never take place. But ultimately, you know, we've got really bad news for the centre-right. So I had a brief chat again last night with Professor David Betts, and his opinion was that he believes the civil war that he has predicted is simply unstoppable, and that there is no solution of any description at the ballot box. I tend to agree with him, in actual fact, but, you know, I'll commit myself to the political route, grassroots campaigning, building blocks at community level. But in truth, look, at the end of the day, if that does happen, well, the centre-right are going to be found wanting very, very quickly, I can assure you. And a whole raft of new leaders will come out of nowhere. That is what will happen in that scenario. Because Farage, he couldn't knock the skin off a rice pudding, quite frankly. And as for Tommy Robinson leading people over the top out of the trenches, what, to his villa in Spain to snort cocaine? With his Irish passport? Come on, get a grip. Truthfully, get a grip. So this is how you spot the containment operators. And of course, there's another classic symptom of that overall disease. You know, the extent to which they spread false rumours about people, to which they gaslight. And the whole purpose of gaslighting is to destroy a person's credibility by besmirching them. And that in process causes an enormous amount of infighting, which then leads to factions and sub-factions and more sub-factions, and then total disintegration, which is the whole purpose of a safety valve operation. Ultimately, it is to disintegrate the concentric hole. And there are other ways in which to spot the containment traps and the safety valve operators. But I think in this video, I've actually covered the fundamental issues here. And I'll return back to what I said at the outset. Look, if you're supporting someone who claims to be anti-establishment and that person is being pumped and promoted around the clock by the mainstream media, and you're dealing with a safety valve operation and you're being conned, you're being seduced into a blind alley to achieve absolutely nothing by design, just like UKIP and the Brexit Party before Deepfake Reform UK. But it is entirely up to you. You know, nobody's forcing you into these safety valve operations. You know, if you can't spot a containment trap by now, then frankly, you know, there really is something quite wrong with you. You know, unless of course you're new to the political game, you know, and then I suppose that's forgivable, really. But people who've been in it 10, 15 years, my goodness, if you're still walking around with brand new brains after 10 to 15 years, you know, you really should find a different occupation or a different interest, in actual fact, because politics certainly is not for people like that. Well, not genuine politics. The safety valve operations, most definitely, you know. And do all of these talking heads know they're safety valve operators? Most definitely, of course they do. I mean, just look at all of their YouTube channels, for example, and their other social media assets. They're being pumped and promoted remorselessly around the clock, you know. Nationalists aren't. They're actually being targeted. They're being hit quite hard because they're genuine. And the powers that be, i.e. the status quo, do not want remigration to succeed. So remigration is centrifugal to this entire dilemma and also the outcome of the battle for Britain and all European nations, in actual fact. If remigration does not succeed, we are finished. Truly. It really is that simple. Anyone opposed to remigration supports balkanization and the policy of the globalists to absolutely destroy European civilization forever. And that's why this video, in my mind, is so important, to ensure that people can spot the containment traps and the pitfalls of the safety valve operators placed in their path. But in truth, I have to say, I think the British are going to have to learn the hard way, the hardest way possible, because I think they're too far down the path of self-delusion, quite frankly, to learn any other way. And that hard way will be the seminal historic lesson, which hopefully those who survive it will never forget. So don't forget what I've said here. You wanted a video on how to spot containment traps and safety valve operators. Now you've got one, you know. I mean, surely you're satisfied, or do you have any complaints? Look, feel free to say whatever you want, providing it's not abusive and threatening, of course. We won't tolerate any of that nonsense. And if you like what I have to say, please like, subscribe, and share this video. It's important to get the message out to as many people as possible about the containment traps. And because the containment traps, quite literally, is like walking through a very intricate minefield without a mine detector. Let me be your mine detector. I know how to spot the containment traps, the mines. I've been in this business for 35 years. It's quite transparent, most of them, in actual fact. Anyway, have a wonderful day walking to the left or right of the containment traps.